We're still talking about the last season of Tom Baker's Doctor Who adventures with Warrior's Gate after this. Hello out there, I'm the oldest nerd, and a very complex episode here. And basically the plot is that the Doctor, Romana, and Adric are trying to get out of E-space and back into their own in-space. And what they find is there is a point where you're in neither universe at 000 coordinates. Therefore, they get out and look to see if they can find some way that they can get themselves over the edge, if you will. And they encountered this ship, which is a slaver ship, they find out later. And the slaves are actually these time-sensitive beings called the Thal. They look kind of like lions, humanoid lions. And they are able to navigate through time somewhat the way that the navigators in Dune were able to go through hyperspace, the same way the tardigrade was able to navigate through the mycelial network in Discovery. They need this time-sensitive being in order to be able to navigate their time ships. And what they're having is that they found themselves at these zero coordinates in which they are unable to make their way out of. Also, their warp engines, they call them warp engines, are damaged. And that's where we have it. It was described that the nature of the captain of this ship was kind of like Captain Mannering in Dad's Army. Now, for those of you in the United States who might not be familiar with this, Dad's Army was a comedy that was about the Home Guard during World War II. The Home Guard was made up of everybody that couldn't go to war. So they were mostly old men and young men and people otherwise who would not have made it into military service. And the comedy was based on the fact that Mannering was kind of a blowhard and was trying to lead the group like they were a tight military battalion, and most of them were just misfits. And they barely kept themselves out of trouble. And that's kind of how this crew is. And so we see especially two lower deck crewmen who are doing their best to get out of work. Some of them will have, a sprained ankle or feeling kind of queasy or something in order to get out of work that needs to be done. They're kind of the comic relief in this otherwise intense story. Now, with the problem that they're having with not being able to repair their engines and not having a navigator, it's not stopping this captain from saying we're pushing ahead anyway. And so when the Doctor and Romana arrive, the Doctor goes off looking to see just what he can find out and ends up among the Thralls, who are the time-sensitive beings that we were talking about. And especially Birak, who appeared in the TARDIS with the Doctor and Romana, along with time winds, whatever that is, that caused damage to the Doctor's hand, to K9's memory unit, and that's probably it. So with these things going on, the Doctor follows Birak to this castle-looking place, and inside it looks like an ancient castle with aggressive armor, and there's some other things in there that kind of keep you busy. Meanwhile, the captain and members of the ship's crew find the TARDIS and are trying to find out how to get in it when Romana comes out and says hi, and they kidnap her and decide to put her in the navigator's chair and strap her in with this thing over her head that causes pain. They are able to get from her the castle that the Doctor is at. And so anyway, everything converges there. And what we find is that the Thal really aren't as noble as they might think they are. They are masters of time. They go from universe to universe, and everything is their garden. And so they have great feast, but they slap around their servants because they're just humans. They're not overly evolved creatures like the Thrall are. So with all of this, the Doctor comes in, and Romana as well, trying to figure out how they can set this to rights. And in fact, Adric is also leaving the TARDIS and trying to help them if they get in trouble. And it turns out that he does it on a couple of occasions. He's able to free Romana from one of her problems. He's able to get the Doctor away from certain death. That's about as far as we need to go with the plot. The rest of it is worth watching because it is complicated. It unwinds over the 4 episodes. There's not a lot of wasted time here just standing around. There's a lot happening. There are like 4 main settings. There's the ship itself, the time ship, which is done with scaffolding. And it was said in the program notes that the scaffolds were not that stable. They weren't meant to have more than a couple of people on them at the same time. And yet they would have as many as 3 or 4 along with a cameraman. Now, these days cameras are very small. The camera I shoot this with will fit in my hand, but in 1980, a small video camera was the size of a couple of shoeboxes and weighed about 40 pounds. And so with this camera that was being balanced up there in order to take shots up here, and this is one of the few episodes to where an in-studio camera is able to follow people around without just being on a flat floor. At that time, studio cameras were huge, about the size of a window air conditioner, and weren't easily moved around. You can go forward and back and side a little bit, and that's about it. So what we have here is a complicated script that had more than its share of special effects, and also more specialty camera moves than you would find in a television production. And that had to do with this new writer that did not know that you could not do television cinematically. Now, he was just ahead of his time because that's the way television is done now. Everything is done pretty much in a cinematic way because the fact that cameras are smaller and cheaper, and video is so much easier to edit, and special effects, digital effects are also easier to do. In that time, though, they did amazing stuff with what they had. Now, there was also a void. This was done just with green screen, and they replaced the green with white, and so everything appeared to be suspended into kind of nothingness. And they also faded the characters away as they walked any distance away from a point of reference. So it was, as best as they could do, just kind of a fog where one could get lost in it in very short notice. And then there was the inside of the castle, which, depending on how the plot went, was either brand new or ancient and cobwebby. And then they had one film unit that went out and filmed the grounds of a castle that was beautiful, but they filmed it in black and white. And that was for an effect that will become more obvious if you watch the show. Despite all of its problems, it was a very well executed episode, and despite the special effects limitations they had at the time, they were paying a lot of attention to stuff, and according to program notes, spent a whole lot more time filming, more time in post-production than they regularly did in a Doctor Who episode. And while it is not incredibly memorable, it certainly had a lot of technical things that were done right. The big thing here is this is the last time we see Romana and K9. Romana, in universe, decides to stay with the Thrall and help them rescue slaves from other parts of time and space, and K9 stays with her in order to keep the instructions on how to construct another TARDIS. So that leaves kind of an open end for Romana to ever go back to Gallifrey if she wants to, which we've established in previous episodes that she didn't. In the real world, she and Tom Baker had been having a relationship. They eventually got married, probably very shortly after this season. But even during the taping of the show, both of them in a relationship and both of them working on a very grueling show, especially this episode had very long days, is bad on a relationship. And that was a problem that a lot of the crew that didn't know that they were living together at that time thought they just hated each other because they were always on just kind of opposite sides of the studio, glaring at each other between shots. And this was all just reacting to the pressure of it. And it turns out after the show was over and they both had time to spend with each other, they found that they really didn't have that much in common to begin with. So the marriage didn't last but maybe a little bit more than a year. Nevertheless, that was the last time we saw Lalla Ward on Doctor Who. She went on to other things and even came back to reprise her character and in the some of the audio adventures that they do. So I'd like to know what you think about all of this. I'd like you to make your comments below, if you will. And if you have not yet subscribed and liked this channel, please do so. That helps us out. And I just want to remind you that we do these retro reviews of Doctor Who for his last season. Next week, I think we're going to encounter the Master. The Master has only been used slightly since the death of Roger Delgado, which happened before Jon Pertwee left the show. And as a result, it puts him at his end of his 12th regeneration, and so he can't regenerate anymore. And so he is seen as kind of a heavily made up, decomposing kind of character. And he's practically a skeleton by the time next episode comes about. But he's got a way of cheating the regeneration rules, as that becomes fairly common in Doctor Who later on. But that's for next week. Until then, and whatever else comes between, don't go far.